And you can also, if you don't like looking at your face, I don't like looking at mine. So you can right click. You can click on the little dots by the picture, and you can say hide self view, and then that just makes your screen simpler. So I can see
Okay.
you, and I can enlarge you a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So Dr. Manaka's yin yang balancing system is what he called it, and he wrote about it extensively in Chasing the Dragon's Tail. But these days, I'm trying to rebrand it somewhat and call it Manaka style acupuncture, which is kind of easier for people to get hold of, and really describes what he, yin yang balancing doesn't really tell us much more than Manaka style acupuncture. So, Dr. Manaka was a Japanese medical doctor. He was born in 1911. He died in 1989, and I started practicing in 1987. And yeah, I remember finding Chasing the Dragon's Tail in a bookshop just after I graduated, and I was looking at it, and I suddenly saw all these mathematical formulae and all this kind of algebra, and I just thought, oh, it's too scientific for me, and I put it away. And there were all these graphs and all these things, and I thought, oh no, it's too scientific for me, so I just put it away, and I didn't buy it. But later, when I met Stephen, I think that was 10 years later in 97, and he explained Manaka and the octahedron. And when I read the book, it made perfect sense, and it was like a thriller. I couldn't put it down. It was an amazing book. Um,
Okay.
so Manaka was a medical doctor, and he combined research with an interest in traditional methods. And he was constantly assimilating new methods. He was like I don't know if you know about this bird called a magpie. A magpie is a black and white bird in the UK and in Europe, and it loves shiny things. So sometimes it will go and it will see a little bit of jewelry in someone's bedroom, and it will run in and steal the jewelry, and it will feather its nest
Oh.
with jewelry. Or it sees something red, and it goes and gets a bit of red cloth, and it steals it. So it's always gathering things from everywhere. And Dr. Manaka was
Oh.
like an intellectual magpie. He was always bringing in these, oh, I've heard about this new method. And then he would test it. So, oh, that works really well. I'm going to use it. Or
Mm.
he would test it, go, doesn't really work. And it would get dumped.
Mm.
But he was always bringing in these new things. And he was a researcher. So he was very concerned to make everything that he did repeatable by other people. So if he said, oh,
Mm.
press this point and press this point, and you will get this result, he expected you to go out and test it and to be able to get the same results. So he wasn't like, oh, I've got secrets and I can do this, and or he just wanted people to be able to repeat his experiments. So he was very
Mm.
scientific in that way. And one of the things that he used to say at lectures and to his students is, don't believe anything I say. In other words, please go out and test it for yourself. And if it works for you, then you know that you've verified what I'm telling you. But don't just take it like I'm the guru, you know, uh,
Mm.
you need to do it because I tell you. He said, you need to do it because you've tested it. So that's the beauty of Manaka's system, is he makes a lot of predictions about what will happen. And for the most part, they happen. And when they don't happen, then he says, oh, well, if that happens, then try this. So he was very, very methodical, and that's part of the beauty of his system.
Mm.
So I think in the 80s, he met Stephen Birch from the UK, and he was introduced to Stephen, and he started to educate Stephen. What Stephen
Mm.
describes as becoming, he says, it was becoming infected with the curiosity virus. So
Okay.
yeah, so he sent him loads of papers. Every week he would send him new papers to study, new things to look at, other books to read. And Stephen's brain was, oh my god, this is so interesting. And eventually Stephen kind of ghost wrote Chasing the Dragon's Tail for Dr. Manaka.
Mm.
Um, And Junko also studied with Dr. Manaka, and Junko and Stephen eventually got married. So that's how Stephen became the main conduit for Manaka style acupuncture in the US and in Europe. And
Oh,
he's taught various students, and so I think I would call myself Manaka's grandchildren. You know, so
then we grandchildren.
yeah, that's right. And I had a Japanese assistant called Koki who had really mastered Manaka style acupuncture, and I introduced him to Steve and said, "Meet your grandkid." So Steve thought that was very funny. So anyway,
Okay.
Dr. Manaka's legacy is a very coherent
Mm,
and effective system of acupuncture that doesn't have any weird assumptions in it. It's full of very logical steps that you can follow and you can repeat. And he also he wrote a lot of papers in Japanese, and that he did a huge amount of research into the channel system. And some of that is in Chasing the Dragon's Tail, and some of that is kind of being lost really in Japan.
mm,
Now, he integrated in his system a lot of Western thinking and physics and a lot of traditional East Asian medicine, TEAM. You'll see that acronym. So TCM is traditional Chinese medicine, and a broader category you can say is traditional East Asian medicine. Um,
mm,
so in terms of team, then his theory is very dependent on the extra vessels, the 8 extraordinary meridians or vessels. It uses a lot of abdominal diagnosis. In practice, it uses a lot of yin yang theory and this idea of balancing. And it uses the dynamics of the meridian system, like, for example, midday, midnight cycles, the Chinese clock.
mm.
Um, and in terms of Western thinking, he started to use relatively new devices like ion pumping cords, electrostatic adsorbers. Sometimes he used silver and gold needles. So things that create a polarity. And you will have come across this idea of polarity stuff being quite important in Japanese acupuncture. Generally, north-south magnets. You'll have come across that in some of the papers I've sent you. Um, he also developed this idea of channel frequencies or meridian frequencies, the idea that different meridians respond to different frequencies of beats per minute. And he was a Western medical doctor. He worked in a hospital, and he said that it was very fortunate for him that his hospital was in the mountains where there was a very windy road. So there were always accidents and people coming in with whiplash injuries.
Oh.
So that was
Oh, okay, okay.
his sense of doctor's sense of humor.
Oh.
So he had a lot of trauma care.
Mm,
And also, he had a lot of knowledge of mathematics, of topology in particular, and physics. And we'll see that he actually was the president of a topology society, the study of shapes.
oh.
And yeah, so that was very important for him to develop his model. So let's talk about yin and yang. Now, as you know, in traditional East Asian medicine, then yin and yang are these kind of two complementary forces. They flow into each other, and where one is excess, one becomes deficient, or they should be absolutely equal, but sometimes they overpower each other or they drain each other, but they're always in relation to the other. They're never separate. And we think about them in terms of anatomy, like the inside of the body is yin and the outside of the body is yang. The skin is more yang compared to the organs inside. The bones are more yin than the skin or the
Mm,
organs. So, everything is relatively yin or relatively yang. But we can also think about them in terms of axes in the body, which are concepts in anatomy as well. So you can think that there's a superior axis which flows from the top of the body to the bottom of the body, from heaven to earth. and that divides the body into two planes. So it's the sagittal plane. And then you have another axis in the body that also flows from the top to the bottom, but this time separates front from back. So like a coronal plane. And then finally, you have a horizontal line in the body that separates the body into two halves, superior and inferior. So these three axes we'll come back to, but just bear them in mind when I show the next slide, the next few slides. Okay, so have you ever been to prepared for a children's party? And you know when you have children's party and you fill up balloons?
Oh yeah.
You blow up balloons and you hang them on the ceiling. So if you rub them on your shirt, if you've got a woolly pullover, the balloon will stick on the ceiling, right? So have you ever done that before? You just rubbed a balloon and you get a static charge, and then when you put it on the wall, it just sticks to the wall.
Yes. Just like the hair, right? Just like hair.
Yeah, just like hair. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So let's imagine we've got a balloon, and we'll do a thought experiment. We'll imagine that these balloons stick to each other. So here's a balloon, and you can see it's just a round shape. There's no front, there's no back, there's no side, there's no left, there's no right, there's no up, no down. It's just a round sphere. But if we blow up another balloon, then you can see now that the shapes look different, because we can say definitely that there's a join in the middle, and we can say there's an axis in the middle. And if we rub some balloons some more, so just picture this, and we put the next pair of balloons on top of this pair, now we've got 4 balloons sitting on top of each other. With 2 balloons sitting on top of 2 balloons. So now you can see, can you see my cursor? No, probably you can't. Let me, I think this is a laser, if I'm lucky. Yes, you can see that.
Yes, I can see.
Yeah, so now we've got an axis here and an axis there. Now let's blow up some more balloons. And we've got 8. We get another pair behind the first pair, and a second pair behind and a fourth pair behind the second pair. So now we've got 8 balloons. So we've got a vertical axis that divides left and right. We've got a horizontal axis that divides top from bottom, and we've got another axis that divides front from back. Okay, so where is this going, this talk of balloons? Let's talk about conception. So here we have a zygote. And then when the sperm has impregnated the egg, and then it becomes a zygote, and it divides once. So there's an axis separating left and right. And then it divides again. These 2 cells divide again. So now we have an axis separating left and right, and superior and inferior. And then it divides again. So now we have the 3 axes of yin and yang, separating left and right, superior, inferior, and front and back. Now, this is the interesting bit. If I join up these 2 lines here, and I go all the way to the top here, I get a triangular shape.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Right. And if I join these 2 points here, and I go up to here, I get another triangular shape.
Oh,
Sorry, right.
Yeah.
And then same again. So what we get is, if we join up those axes, what we get is an octahedron. Right, yeah. So once again, you can see, so inherent in the zygote, in the first 3 divisions, Manaka said there's an octahedron.
Okay.
Now, what he also said is, let's look at the course of, so he was thinking, well, is there anything in acupuncture that relates to the number 8? Well, there's 12 main meridians, there's 12 sinew channels, there's 12 low connecting channels, there's 12, Zhang Fu, but there are 8 extraordinary vessels. So he thought,
Yeah.
can I make some sense of this number 8 here and the 8 extra vessels? And this is what he came up with. He said that the Renmai and the Dumai are this horizontal axis that divides left from right.
Mm.
And the Daimai, am I missing a line? Yeah, I think maybe I am. And the Daimai is this line here that separates top from bottom. Yeah, so it's this is the Daimai here. Because the Daimai is a horizontal meridian. And then he said that the pathway of the Yangwei Mai, which goes along the torso, I don't know if you can see me, I've hidden my thing.
I can.
It goes along the torso here. It divides front from back. And the Yinwei Mai runs along here, dividing the planes of the arm also into 2. So his theory is that the yin and yang wei mai define the anterior and posterior axis, and the daimai defines the superior and inferior axis, and the renmai and the dumai define this left-right axis.
Okay.
And this is all happening within these first few divisions. Now, I told you that Dr. Manaka was intrigued by topology. And if I ever write my Manaka book, I'm going to redo these diagrams so they're a little bit better. But if you think that very, very primitive structures, like one of the most primitive structures there is a worm. And a worm is essentially a tube. It's got a mouth at one end and an anus at the other, and it kind of eats stuff and things just travel through the tube. And a fish is actually no different. A fish is exactly the same, but it's developed rudimentary fins. So it's like a worm with fins. And it's got a tube, it's got a mouth at one end, and it shits food at the other end. So basically, a fish is the same topography as a worm.
Oh, okay.
And a dog, if you look at a dog is essentially a worm with feet. So the fins have become feet and legs. So what was a fish is now a dog in evolutionary terms, but it's still essentially a walking, barking tube.
Okay.
And then in evolution, we stand up and look, same thing. Food goes in at one end and comes out the other. So now we're a very sophisticated worm. So Manaka's contention in topology is that essentially that octahedral structure that existed right at the beginning has, through evolution and through embryological development, kept its essential structure. And he saw it as that. So you've got 4 anterior quadrants and 4 posterior quadrants. So his idea was, maybe there's a problem in this quadrant and it's all scrunched up. This person's got let's pretend that there's a woman who works in a supermarket and she spends all her life picking up pieces of meat and cans and running them through the scanner and putting them on the other side. So her right shoulder is going to get more developed than her left shoulder. So chi is either, you could say chi is stagnating here in the pectoral area. So that means that maybe these other quadrants are kind of deficient because there's more energy here. So Dr. Manaka's thinking is, well, if this is excess, we need to balance it somehow by treating the other quadrants. So that was his octahedral model. It was basically assessing which quadrants were out of alignment and then balancing them. And he did that through abdominal palpation. So he palpated the 4 quadrants here on the abdomen, and he actually mapped out reaction zones for each of the 8 extras, because he said that the 8 extras are involved in this very primal, primitive, structural mechanism. Like when there are 8 cells, they're already signaling to each other. And he was saying his idea was that the 8 extras are a very primitive signaling system that as the embryo develops, they get superseded by other signaling mechanisms like the nervous system or the endocrine system. But right at the beginning, that is the foundation signaling system. That's what he thought the 8 extras were, this kind of ancestral communication mechanism. And so, and they're still operating even now when we have all these other signaling systems in the body, but you can access them through the master and couple points. So he found ways to diagnose them from the belly and treatment ways so diagnostic methods for the 8 extras and diagnostic methods to find out which quadrants are out of balance, and then using the 8 extras to remedy them. So that's the basic theory. Let me pause for a second and see if you've got any questions.
Actually, I want to ask about the yin wei mai and yang wei mai. I'm a little confused. What's the difference that you pointed here?
So in terms of the meridian pathways, Dr. Manaka's model is very easy on the first set of meridians because Ren and Du are very obvious. They're on the midline, so they very clearly separate yin and yang. The separate left and right. Yeah, because that's just the midline. So that's easy. That's very easy to grasp. And then the daimai is very easy to grasp because it's a horizontal meridian, so it separates upper from lower, superior and inferior. Now, the pathway of the yang wei mai is essentially the pathway of the gallbladder channel, which comes along this median aspect of the torso. So the yang wei mai separates yin and yang, or the front and half, on the torso. Right. So that's how you get your anterior and posterior halves on the torso, and also on the legs. He said that this time he switches more to the master and couple points because the master point is pericardium 6. So the pericardium channel separates the arm. It runs along the median aspect of the arm. And the triple burner channel, which comes from triple burner 5, the master point of the yang wei mai, runs along the median aspect of the yang part of the arm. So the arm is split into 2 halves by the master and couple point. So he's saying that those aspects, front and back, are separated on account of the master and couple points.
Oh,
right.
Okay, I get it.
Right. Okay.
And then, may I ask one more?
Of course you can.
You said that so because there is imbalance, so there is one is more and then one is less. I mean deficient. So we treat the opposite one, right? My question is,
yeah, go on.
Is it always, or just sometimes? I mean, the treatment always use the other side, or it's just an additional one?
I think I'll answer that more clearly later as we study. For now, just keep it as an unknown.
Okay.
um,
Okay.
it's more it's more to do with knowing that, oh well, if there's a problem in a quadrant, then maybe I want to use points. It's about point selection and left and right.
Okay.
So it's a kind of guide towards selection of points, not necessarily about using the opposite quadrant.
Okay.
Yeah. So, for example, points on here on the right hand will affect this area, this upper right quadrant.
Yeah.
So, if someone's got discomfort here in the chest, say in the ribs, I would want to use a point in the same quadrant. If someone's got
Okay.
problems in the hip and the inguinal region here, then I would want to use point on the right foot because it's in the same quadrant, like spin 6. Yeah, so it's more,
Okay.
yeah, so it's that kind of thinking. Good questions. Good questions.
Okay.
Great. All right.
Okay.
Let's go back. Now, Dr. Manaka also, come on. Yeah. Wanted to know whether there were examples of the octahedron in pathology. So I need to change that. I shouldn't say kimono and obi. There was yeah, I don't know where. Never mind. That's a typo. He noticed that there were some experiments which he referred to in. Okay, got it. Yeah, it was a guy called Dr. Takagi who used these experiments, which he called the kimono obi experiment. He says the kimono, a kimono obi stops you sweating above because you tighten it up really, really tight. And when you tighten it really, really tight, somehow it affects your sweating and you stop sweating above the band. So that was evidence that Dr. Takagi said of the octahedron. But he also noticed that sometimes there are sweating patterns which occur only on one side. And he did some experiments using pressure pain to test opposite quadrants. So when he would press on certain points, then there would be less sweating on the opposite quadrant. And those are talked about in Chasing the Dragon's Tail. And then there's a phenomenon called Harlequin flushing, which I hadn't heard of. So I Googled it and I came up with these images. So here you can see evidence of flushing on one side. So only this upper right quadrant is normal. The other 3 quadrants are all affected.
Okay.
Yeah, and here, upper right quadrant is affected. And this came after he had the nasal tube. So he got this flushing on one side. You can see it's very, very symmetrical. So that's kind of interesting stuff. So if I can summarize Dr. Manaka's system, then we can say that the 8 extraordinary vessels define the octahedral structure. And the treatment of the extraordinary vessels was what he thought was very fundamental, was his root treatment. He said this was the kind of deepest anomaly in the body. And he diagnoses through palpation, the abdominal pattern determines the treatment. So when he said, oh, it's very tight down the midline, that means it's a Renmai pattern, for example. We'll go into the patterns in much more detail next week. But basically, that determines the treatment. So if you find a Renmai pattern on the tummy, then you treat the Renmai. It's as simple as that. And as this system comes into existence at the embryological stage, it's a very low energy system. So Dr. Manaka said it's suitable to stimulate it with very low energy mechanisms. So he's not going to do electroacupuncture to treat the 8 extras, because it's like if I go into a classroom and everyone's talking very loudly, then I need to talk really loudly in order to be heard. So I need to kind of go at the same frequency as the class.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll keep talking loudly until they go quiet. And then I can go more and more quiet, and then I can talk in my normal voice because they're listening. But if I start off with my normal quiet voice, then no one will listen. So you always need to match your stimulation to the receptors. So Dr. Manaka's idea was this is a very low energy system that's operating right from the beginning of life. So we need to stimulate it in a low way. Okay. So I'm going to describe this 4-step protocol that we're going to look at. And in the next 8 weeks, we're going to concentrate very much on steps 1 and 2. And I'll talk to you as well about steps 3 and 4. But our main focus is going to be grasping the essentials, which is 1 and 2. So step 1 is, and step 2 put together, is what Dr. Manaka called the root treatment. In other words, regulating the body at its kind of deep level. And steps 3 and 4 are supplementary treatments which may or may not be necessary. So let me talk about steps 1 and 2 first. So step 1, the goal of step 1 is to release the yin aspect of the body. And by the yin aspect, he means the abdomen. And the goal of step 2 is to release the yang aspect of the body. So by that, he generally means the back. And I'll show you this in more detail in a minute. You don't have to. I'm going to come back to all of these. Step 3 is to address the body structure if necessary. And that means, with our woman who works in the supermarket, we might need to do some kind of structural adjustment on her shoulder to allow the energy flow to do better. And step 4 is to treat symptoms. So if she's got really bad pain in her shoulder, we need to do stuff that's good for her pain. And Dr. Manaka often said that root treatment and branch treatment are like the 2 front wheels of a car connected by an axis. So very often you need to do them together. But in actual fact, some people, it's just enough to do root treatment. But usually we will do steps 1, 2, and 4. And sometimes we will do steps 3. So let's look at this. This is, I think it's Marion actually. It's my good friend and colleague Marion, who originally had done this slide. I've changed it a bit since then, but she provided the photos. So here, the goal of step 1 is to release the abdomen. So you press the abdomen, you find some kind of reaction, and then you do the master and couple points of the 8 extras. And then the abdomen gets softer, it changes right away. And we use some kind of polarity device at this stage. So for example, come back. Ion pumping cords, which we'll talk about more. Electrostatic adsorbers, which I've suggested that you get from Jeffrey. Silver and gold needles, which you don't need to get for now, definitely not. So I would suggest you get these things the electrostatic adsorbers. It's going to make your life very simple. These are cheaper, but you need to use needles with them, or you need to use silver spike points. They're kind of these little silver electrodes, which Jeffrey might be able to help you with, possibly. Okay. No, I won't explain much about what ion pumping cords do at the moment. That's not really relevant. It's just they create a polarity between the 2 points, and that's a very dynamic way of treating the 8 extras. That's all we need to say about them for now. We'll definitely come back to that topic. They need to be kept on the body for about 10 or 15 minutes, whereas the electrostatic adsorbers are usually done within a couple of minutes, so quite quick. So electrostatic adsorbers are a little bit more dynamic, and they're much more practical. Now, step 2 of the root treatment is treating the yang part of the body. And usually this meant doing a pair of back shu points. So supposing you did the yang chow, the dumai. So the master point is small intestine 3, and the couple point is bladder 62. Yeah. So that would be your step 1 treatment, is to needle small intestine 3 and bladder 62, and then your step 2 treatment would be to needle the back shu point of the small intestine, which goes with small intestine 3, and bladder 27, which goes with bladder 62. So you needle the back shu point of small intestine and bladder. So a very logical kind of selection for the back shu point. But sometimes, I mean, Dr. Manaka wasn't doctrinaire about that. It wasn't like, oh, it has to be this way. And he had all kinds of variations. But if you remember, I didn't explain this little diagram very well. You can imagine each step as being like a doctor's bag. Or maybe we'll just say clothes. So in step 1, in this bag, it's all shirts. And in step 2, it's all kinds of clothing that you would wear on your legs. And step 3 is all beachwear. And step 4 is, or should I call it underwear? And step 4 is headgear, like hats, scarves, sunglasses, earphones. So yeah. So as long as you use one element from each bag. Oh, what happened? I didn't know it could do that.
I think no. I think the paper make it. I put the paper here, but I think the paper just touched my mouse. I don't do anything.
Okay, cool. I thought
for the.
Oh yeah, no. Somehow I've switched to pen on my laser pointer. Now I've got my laser pointer. Okay, I understand. Okay. Right, yeah.
Okay. Well, I think okay.
Yeah, okay. I don't think it was you. I think I clicked the wrong thing.
Okay.
So as long as there's an element from step 1 and an element from step 2, it doesn't matter what element you pull out of the bag, as long as it's properly classified. So going back to step 2, his usual treatment was to do warm needle technique, Kyutoshin, on these back shu points related to the step 1 treatment. But sometimes he didn't. He did variations on that. And in my case, I tend to do a lot of ontake at step 2. And I'll explain the logic behind that maybe later in the course if we get time to talk about ontake. Step 3, he liaised with another Japanese practitioner who had developed a bodywork method called sotai. And he started to practice sotai himself. But being typical Dr. Manaka, he decided that he wanted to do sotai simultaneously with moxa. So he was giving a body stretch and also
Uh-huh.
burning amoxicone. And then normally in Sotai, you get the patient to push against resistance, and then you say,
Ah.
relax. So, and then you let go of the resistance. But Dr. Manaka was getting them into the position, then lighting amoxicone, and then saying, okay, push
Mm.
against resistance. And as soon as you feel the heat from the moxa, relax. So he kind of combined it with acupuncture. Um,
Okay.
in a very typical way, he kind of got something and then made it his own. So that is one thing that he thought was very important to do at step 3 was you could do this kind of channel stretching with moxa.
Okay.
And then step 4 is basically treating symptoms. So he adapted loads of stuff. So he used small cone moxibustion, or Q. He used Kutoshin, this warm needle technique. He used Chinetsku, which is a large cone moxibustion.
Oh, the big one.
Sorry?
The cone one, right? The
Yeah,
cone.
the big
Yes.
cones, yeah. So he used all kinds of moxibustion for symptom relief. Then he also was, he studied with some Japanese bloodletting masters, Murayama and I can't remember the other one, Kodo and Murayama. And they just did nothing but bloodletting. That was their thing. They didn't do any other treatment. They just bloodlet everybody, and they were very specialized. And they wrote a whole book about it. And he thought, oh yeah, this is great. So he adapted that into his protocols. Um, and then he did cupping as well. And he thought cupping was very useful for branch treatment. And he also did these very small needles like press tacks or intradermal needles or press spheres. And he used various holographic models like hand acupuncture and ear acupuncture for pain relief. And he also just did ordinary needling, just sticking in a needle on a point that's good for such and such, speed 6 for digestive
Mm.
problems, for example. So his model was very sophisticated. Um, so these are the kind of the characteristics of his treatment. First of all, you diagnose the octahedron through abdominal palpation. Then you do very, very shallow needling because you don't want to stimulate the patient because it's a low energy system. Or you don't use needles at all. You use devices like the electrostatic adsorbers. Then you use some kind of polarity device, ion pumping cords, attached to these very shallowly inserted needles, or a non-needle device like an electrostatic adsorber. And then once those areas release, you go through the 4-step protocol to treat the root and branch. So we're back to our bags.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to be looking at. So any questions from you?
I have questions. So if the root treatment is step 1 and 2, it means that we will always do some points in the front and back.
Yes.
Always, every patient.
Always. Yes.
Okay. But we always okay. And then I want to ask Sensei, I've learned some about Chinese technique, right? I mean Chinese technique of treatment. Like their root treatment is kind of different with this Japanese style, right? So it means that we never can combine the Chinese treatment with Japan one, right?
Okay.
Because it's completely different, I think.
Yeah, I think so. So number one is that when the ion pumping cords are on, you don't want to do any other needling. So once you've got that polarity stuff going, you don't want to be sticking needles on their head or on their neck or on other points going, oh, this point's good for this and this point's good for this, because that will upset the chi and the energy flow. And you might get what Dr. Manaka calls counterflow chi. So he even asked people to remove their jewelry. So could you take off your earrings? Can you take off any rings, bracelets, necklaces that you're wearing? Because he didn't want any other metals touching the skin when he was doing ion pumping. So my patients know to do that. You know, there's a bowl in the clinic, and as soon as they arrive, they start peeling off their jewelry, or sometimes they do it in the waiting room and they come in like this and dump it into the bowl. You know, particularly in Malaysia, some people wear lots of jewelry. So they're just used to that now. But the first session, they're a bit put out. Really? I have to take out all these? Oh, I haven't taken this one out for years. Hang on a minute. And and then I become like the metal police. It's like, oh, look, you've got another one on your tummy. Oh, yes, I forgot that one. And oh, you've got a ring on your toe. Oh, yes, I forgot that one. So I become like, like immigration officer, you know. Let me
Okay.
yeah. So
And then
going back to your question, it's good not to mix and match. I would say one other thing, and maybe I will send you a link to an interview I did about Japanese acupuncture with Maya on YouTube recently,
okay.
where I talk about embracing something fully. Send Maya interview. Okay. Because one of the ways to learn a system is not to dabble in it, but just to, this is what I'm going to do. And that was certainly my story with Manaka, is that I just started doing it from day one after I learned it, and I just dropped what I was doing. But for you, it's different because you're not learning it in an intensive weekend like I did. You're learning it over an 8-week period. But I would say, in answer to your question, don't do any other stuff when you're ion pumping at step 1. But by all means, do anything that you know for step 4. So if you know that certain points are good for headache, you know, like gallbladder 20 and gallbladder 21, then do it at step 4. Because that's great.
I see.
Yeah. So that's where you're
still with the
still
with the low frequency, right?
Yeah, you don't want to do the heavy stimulation, I think. So you would still needle relatively shallowly, and you wouldn't try and get dirty, but you would use the point selection. So it's not like you have to lose everything that you've learned. It's that you need to compartmentalize it. So there's a time when you can use it, but not during step 1.
Okay.
What's
Just like, let's say it's what I read your article. It's 1 milli until 3 milli. Is it right?
Yeah.
From the light one until the deep one.
Yeah. So do you use a guide tube when you?
Oh yeah, yes.
You do. Okay. So if you imagine that this is the guide tube and this is the needle, then that bit that you can see when the guide tube is standing on the skin is 4 millimeters.
Okay.
So you want to tap that in until it more or less 1 millimeter is sticking out, and that's your 3 mil.
Okay.
And then remove the guide tube, and the needle will fall over.
Be hard.
The needle will fall over. It will lie flat on the skin. Yeah, and that's fine. Okay. That's good enough.
Then of course it will be hard if, let's say, we don't bring the guide tube. It will be hard, right, Sensei?
You need to use smaller needles, like the kind of needle you would do the ear with, like those very short needles, and you can just insert them
a very small one.
Yeah. Okay. And then you can just twirl them in. But Japanese acupuncture uses guide tubes. That's part of it. So it's
this one until 3 millimeter. If obesity patients, still the same or maybe deeper?
Still the same.
Same. Okay.
I think when you're ion pumping, then the needle needs to be very shallow. And in fact, Dr. Manaka experimented with deep needling and with getting chi sensation. And he says that it works much less effectively So the current is flowing on the skin in the superficial aspect. And the deeper you go, the more you interfere with that. So for ion pumping, I would say definitely just use those very shallow depths, like 1 to 3 millimeters, probably 3 millimeters. And then you're going to need to tape the needle down at the beginning, but I'll explain this nearer the time, so that the weight of the clip doesn't pull the needle out. But if you're using the adsorbers, this doesn't matter. And then when you're working on the back, if you're doing warm needle technique, then you do needle more deeply, because the needle has to be deep enough to 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 stand in the muscle, so that you can put the weight of the moxa on top.
Oh,
So
yeah,
that's a more conventional needling, but you still use finer needles. You use finer Japanese needles. And then finally, when you're doing branch treatment, you tend to needle relatively shallowly. So you could maybe, with your obese patient, you could needle 3 or 4 millimeters, just the depth of the, like, make the head disappear. Okay, good questions.
Okay. Maybe last question, Sensei. My last question is, the polarity agent is so crucial, right, Sensei? So if we don't, let's say we travel to somewhere, we always have to bring this polarity agent, or sometimes when we don't have it, just by needling, is it work, or the power is less, or very less, like that, less or much?
The power is less. I think the polarity agent is important, and I developed something called a mana pack with my friend Marion, like 20, 30 years ago. It was like a tool, a little. Of course, I haven't got it here. Yeah, it's like a little plastic box where you put screws and screwdrivers and things, like a small flat. It looks a bit like a laptop, but just made of plastic with small compartments. And we both called it our mana pack. I bought her one from the DIY store, and I bought myself one, and we still have them. But for some reason, hers is in really good condition, and mine is in really bad condition. And
to bring anywhere, right?
Yeah, that's right. So that was my mana pack, and it had my my small needles. It had my very fine Japanese needles for. It had moxa for Kyutoshin. It had small moxa for rice grain moxa. It had my ion pumping cords, and I found a way to pack them up very neatly and keep them in the box, and a few other little bits and pieces. So that was my mana pack. It had everything I needed to do Manaka style acupuncture. It had ear needles, for doing his isophasal holographic pain relief treatments. It had all kinds of little gadgets, because Manaka's a gadget guy. But actually, these days I have a small wash bag that I do have with me now, and that contains everything I need. So it's just like a wash bag, like the kind you take when you travel, and that contains my electrostatic adsorbers and the other things I need, my ontake, my Taishin, the touch needling, so everything I need. Yeah.
I see. Okay, Sensei.
Yeah.
I think that's all, Sensei, my questions. If I have some, maybe I'll email Sensei, okay?
Okay. Or just write them down and save them for next time, because you will have more questions.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, then. Then I think that we can finish for today. And okay. What I will do is I will send you. Do you have much time this week?
Yes, I have time.
Great. Yeah. So I'll send you some stuff to listen to or to watch.
Okay.
Because there's there's an interview that I did with Maya that I think would be quite to the point for you. And there's something I did for Geological. It's like a thing which is based on the article I sent you about Japanese acupuncture, what's so unique. So it's kind of like a radio show that I did, which is just kind of talking about Japanese acupuncture generally. So that might reinforce some of the ideas we've been talking about. That will be good for you. And if I can think of anything else for you to read, I'll send that to you too. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Sensei.
All right. When would
Maybe
you like?
You need to stop the record. before leaving later.
Oh yeah, no, I will do that. Yeah, it's even if I just end the meeting, it will stop recording when I end, so we won't lose it. It's okay.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
so when I can stop the recording now, though, we can just finish off. If yes, you will receive an email. Do you want to stop the recording to the cloud? Yes.